All right, guys, this episode is going to be slightly different. First off, there's no Jada or Kylie. Secondly, this one may run a little long. I am surrounded by preachers.
Do you know how many people just checked out because of this?
Hey guys, this is Future Brian cutting in. What started out as a one sit down has actually turned into a series. So this is actually turning into a 4-part series on church security. I hope you guys really enjoy this. I'm not going to lie, this was a very fun time that I had sitting down with these guys. So I hope you guys also enjoy it. If this is not really applicable to you, there's still a lot of great principles that you might can learn from. All right, guys, back to the show. All right, so in this episode, we're going to be talking about church security teams, safety teams, whatever you want to call them. I am gathered a group of 4 guys that I am very close to. We are going to go around the table. We get to start with you just because you have an awesome name.
Oh, well, thank you.
And then we'll work our way around. You guys introduce yourselves.
I'm Brian Hullett. I pastor Overflow Church in the Midway community, and I'm just happy to be here, man. Thanks for the call, by the way. I appreciate that.
I'm Brandon Wolfe, pastor Walburg Baptist Church in the Walburg community, not far from Brian.
We're a rock's throw.
That's right. And same thing. Very thankful that you're doing this and that you're looking out for people and you're trying to inform them and educate them right now. This is awesome.
I'm Freddie Moritz. I pastor Faith Baptist Church in Denton, and I'll let you know whether I thank you for this or not.
This might be a terrible.
That's awesome. My name is Luke Jackson. I'm the lead pastor at Mount Zion Wesleyan Church.
The church sizes are different. The length of time that you've actually had a security team is different, and I want to kind of all these different perspectives. So can you guys, I don't care what order, you don't have to like work around in an order like this, but just chime in. How did your security team get started? Like, why did it get started? Like, what was the thing that said, hey, I think we need this?
Go ahead.
You go ahead?
No. I defer to you.
No, after you. Yeah.
See, this is the problem. This is going to be the problem.
But I think the need is different too. That's the thing, is like every church is set up differently. Like you got a different format, you got a different layout of your buildings, you got different ministries operating during your services, so the need's totally different too. You know, like what works at my church won't work at somebody else's.
True.
You know?
That's right.
And I think that's where it's been for us. Ours got started a few years ago shortly after I'd come to pastor there, and had a wonderful group of people who came and started serving and started getting involved and joining the church and everything, and retired police officer, and awesome guy, and it was already kind of on my heart to sort of start this and make sure that our people were safe, not just in the event of a worst case scenario. That's really not the top priority of our safety team, although they're there for that, but also just to be that first point of contact for people, to make sure that nobody's falling in the parking lot at 11:10 and you didn't get to them, you know, things of that nature. That's why we refer to it as a safety team. So for us, it was, this guy had it on his heart. He said, you know, hey, we need to look after our people here. We need to make sure that obviously they're protected from worst case events, and you know, churches, we love to pride ourselves on being open. You know, I mean, we're welcoming, and when you welcome, you're going to eventually get people who are there for the wrong reasons. You know. And some of those wrong reasons are really negative. I mean, you know, we see worst case scenarios of that. So when we were looking at it for our situation, we were seeing like our buildings, our format, our layout. We were looking at our needs for our congregation, and we kind of cultivated after that. So this guy and myself, we got together. We did a lot of research, did a lot of looking into things, started doing some trial and error processes along the way. You know, just running with me and him and one other person, and just seeing how things were going, where we would have a need, watching. And it's kind of growing, and it's still growing right now. I mean, we're still navigating. Now we're navigating a different ministry model through COVID and everything, so we've had to make a lot of changes for that, but that's pretty much it.
Ours is still new. We're about 6 months into it, maybe.
Yeah.
And we're still learning a whole lot, trying to learn the dynamics of each other, make sure we work together as a team. And so we're still learning and still growing, and they're still trying to figure their positions and stuff in the church and how best serve in those areas. So we got a lot to go yet.
Yeah, likewise, we started ours about 14 years ago, and it was in response to an incline that we saw in which people were entering into churches in order to do harm. And 20 years ago, I don't know if it's because media is reporting it now more or not, but it seems like churches were exempt, but we were no longer at that point. And then in addition to that, one of our values is we believe everyone is created and designed and mandated to serve. And this was a great way that we could create an opportunity for primarily our men to feel, it was a good open door for them to feel like this is something that I can contribute, this is a way that I can serve. It's not as invasive. And then also we have a number of ex-military and law enforcement who their skill sets were tailored towards this. God had called them, wired them, and gifted them in a way that they could actually contribute to the health and to the safety of the overall congregation and community. So it just met our kind of checked a number of boxes for us in our particular context.
Ours kind of started out of tragedy. Down in South Carolina, there was that church shooting a few years ago, and we're 8 years old. The church is 8 years old. So at this time, so we thought to ourselves earlier on, probably whenever that happened, 3 or 4 years ago, somebody stood up and said, we probably should do something about this. What if this happens? And where we were meeting at before, we were meeting in a shopping center because we were just getting started, and there was one way in and one way out, and we thought to ourselves, we got to have somewhere, other kind of way in and out, especially for people. So we occupied 3 storefronts, and there were doors, but they were blocked off. And so I was like, let's create something here. So we had a curtain hanging up, and we could just rip the curtain down and run out the doors. And I was like, what is this? And so that's kind of how we started. Is this, similar to Brandon and. We had a guy that was actually my cousin. He stood up and says, we have to do something about this. What if this happens here? And I think all of us are, whether we want to admit it or not, we all think, well, this couldn't happen here. It's always in the back of our mind. Sure. I think we had that conversation before too.
We did. And that's a constant subject on the podcast.
Oh man,
we're talking about, because everybody thinks it can't happen here, it won't happen to me.
Right.
And truth is, random violence happens.
That's why it's random.
That's right.
Exactly.
It can. That's the whole point.
So that's the whole idea of, and it's very biblical to protect yourself. You are God's.
Right.
We are the temple of God.
Right.
And so in my mindset, I'm not trying to get the gospel to work for me, but for me, it's my body's the temple, and it matters, and the people in their church matter, and so. For someone to come in and do harm like that, we had to think about that.
Yeah.
So we not only thought about that way, but also in a way of our safety team consists of, I guess you would call security. I guess that there's a better name for it, but there's also the medical side of it, where we're very, very, I guess, aware that there's medical emergencies and other type of emergencies. So we had to be well versed, just like everybody here is very well versed in both of those sides of things. So that's kind of how ours started. So unfortunately, ours started out of tragedy. So we was like, oh man, this is terrible. What if this happens here? Well, it made us start questioning. So I think that's where negatives turns into positives on our side of things.
I think between that shooting and then the one in Texas,
that
was 2 things that I've talked to several churches since those times, and those 2 things were things that people bring up that says, hey, we need to start a security team. I've helped several churches start a security team since that time.
Right.
They've brought me in to kind of help get things set up and rolling, or train something they've already got up and rolling. And it's a lot of it kind of goes back to those 2 incidences.
I think the statistics that I saw and the research that I've done, and by research I mean one Google search. 91 people have died in churches since 2012, according to Google. So that's, no one should die from a gunman or any kind of violence inside God's house.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of where I stand with that. It's just terrible.
We've kind of approached it the same way. We've had the mindset that, Scripture says that believers will suffer for their faith, for their stance for Christ. And so there is that. We understand that. But to willingly put my own family into that path, is not my responsibility. My responsibility as a dad, as a husband, is to protect my wife and kids. That's my primary role as a father and husband. And so it's the same kind of mentality in a church. Like, to shepherd, we're assuming, it's like I talked to one of my buddies who's a pastor also, and we were talking about the same thing. And we're treating everybody who comes to that church like you were planning on going to lunch on Sunday. Mm-hmm. So our job is to make sure that at the end of the day, with the safety team at least, that you do get to lunch.
That's perfect.
Within our power. And we understand you can't, prepare for every contingency, and we understand bad people, if they really want to do bad things, they could probably pull it off. We understand that, but there's still that level of faith, but also preparedness. And like you said, it's biblical. I mean, the psalm that says, "You train my fingers for war." I mean, that's a true statement. There's a defensiveness that we need to have toward our people. Obviously not an offensive nature, and we still want to be welcoming, and we see the gospel change hearts all the time. But still, those people who came were intending on doing something after church. We want to try to make sure that they get to do that.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that's our responsibility, as you mentioned, as a shepherd. A shepherd had two primary tools, a crook to rescue, but also a mallet to bash when
club.
Necessary.
Right,
that's
exactly.
Right. And to an extent, the security team is an extension of those shepherding responsibilities. Yeah. I meet with our security team every Sunday morning, and I always remind them, you are ambassadors. Your first responsibility is an extension of the welcome team. When people see you, they don't associate you necessarily as a security team. Right. They associate you as someone who is welcoming them.
First point of contact.
That's it, first point of contact, because they're out on the golf carts, in the parking lot area, but they're also stationed at, large traffic areas. So for a visitor to say that the security team is their first point of contact is a very accurate assessment and statement. Mm-hmm. And their primary responsibility is to be a shepherd extension, welcoming and loving. Right. They're nice until they no longer can be.
Right.
So.
And with the right people in place in
right.
that too, you also see that they can. And this is where I think you'll probably ask this, but you got to be selective. Like, you can't form this as some sort of committee that anybody can volunteer for.
Right.
You have to be so selective and prayerful and seek wisdom and guidance from other believers, law enforcement, all that. Those people have those two eyes.
Yeah.
So they have one eye that's always on the defensive posture, but they have one eye that's always on that I'm an ambassador for Christ and I'm welcoming this person in the name of Jesus. And sometimes those two eyes, for lack of a better term, they focus on the same person, and they see, okay, now we got a situation. But you have people who can do that, because the majority of the time something doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so what you don't want to have is like an armed security patrol walking around with,
that's right.
All these different tools hanging
out,
tactical gear, right? The helmet, night vision for your Sunday evening services or whatever. You don't want the ghillie suit guy out in the grass.
Right.
You want people who, like you said, you want them to welcome people in the name of Jesus, and you want them to help people, visitors, to navigate your facility. But also in that, they're always keeping that watchful eye.
That's right.
That's so smart.
Yeah, I think Brandon was right. Situational awareness, that's something we talk
100%.
About all the time. Yeah. So just be very alert and aware and respond appropriately to the circumstances and situation that presents itself. So
we never, you were talking about the selective process. Mm-hmm. And we never say from on platform, hey, we're looking for safety people. Yeah. We never do that.
No. Yeah.
Our guy actually kind of gets to know people. Yeah. Hey, you're a cop. Okay, yeah, that's good. How do you think about this? And we let them choose, but we approach that person.
Yeah.
So, it's very, very. You don't want to get up there and go, hey, anybody want to shoot some guns?
That's right.
Anybody concealed carrying? You want to walk
anybody got their gun with them?
Edit that part out.
It's like nobody wants to do that. So what we want to do is be very, very careful on who we ask to join the team.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very selective.
Yep.
Very. Yeah.
Okay. When you guys were getting your team started, like, how did and I know you guys kind of touched on it a little bit, but is it something that you reached out there and said, hey, to somebody that I need help getting this thing started, or did somebody approach you, or how did that kind of form for you guys? Like, if a church is looking to get, I don't know, we've got listeners actually in several different countries. We've got listeners all across the United States. So everything's going to be different for people. But if somebody's in a church and they're like, I think we need it, or if there's a pastor somewhere that listens to it and says, I think our church needs it, how would you guys suggest getting it started? How did it work for you? that kind of stuff.
The first thing that we did was reach out to law enforcement, like the sheriff's department.
Yeah.
And say, okay, what's the best way to do this on your level? What if we had to call you guys? What would you want to hear from us? And so Richie Simmons came in to our church, who was the local sheriff here in this county. For all you Filipinos out there, don't know. But anyway, you said other countries.
There is. I was actually kind of shocked when I looked at the analytics. I was like, holy crap, there's like 29 different countries that listen to our podcast. What
That's pretty cool. So we just reached out to law enforcement and said, what would this look like for you if we had to call you? And so he came in and taught a whole thing.
Yeah.
And that was just, a huge foundation for us. And from there, we've reached out to other, places to say, okay, how about some training medically? How about some training defensively and things like that? So we've built it like that.
Yeah.
As far as building a team, again, we identified people who maybe, like Pastor Luke said, these are people who God's created for this, and God sent them into our congregation for this. And so we kind of begin to pray about that and say, okay, who is it? It's definitely not this guy. It's like, you better not do that. But surprisingly, we have a lot of ladies who are very good shots and very good at.
It's embarrassing, right?
Yeah, because you're not.
My wife
definitely,
outshoots me
man.
every time.
Yeah.
And so it's one of these things where you wouldn't expect, a 5'3" lady to be on the safety team, but she is.
Yeah,
sure.
That's your ace in the hole.
That's
though.
right.
So we've got the same thing.
It's awesome. It's good.
Yeah, for us, I guess it was, we started by looking at the whole world around us and just kind of having to come to terms with saying, okay, it can happen here. We don't want it to, but it could. There's nothing that says it won't. And so from that point on, it was like, what is our need? And we did sort of the same thing with the reach out to local law enforcement and getting their input. Same kind of idea. Like, what would you want to know if this were to happen on our property? What would you want to have in place when you arrived? And so and again, for us, it was, a lot of providence too, because I think it was involved with a lot of prayer, because we were really thinking that, okay, we don't want to do this by just going around and saying, you look like you're carrying, you want to guard us, that's definitely not the right mentality to have,
He's carrying on the outside. It's a revolver.
Outside he's got a 6-inch 357, and
His nickname's Dirty Harry.
right, yeah. Yeah, and he said, "Do you feel lucky?" Anyway, so it was like really selective, but it was also seeing that from somebody else's eyes and realizing that me as a pastor and as a human being with no law enforcement training, good friends in military, but no military training either, that I'm not equipped to make all those decisions myself too. So it was a lot of humility on my part, which really wasn't. That time it wasn't hard. It's hard at other times, right, guys? But at that time it really wasn't hard, because this wasn't about me. This was really about, I think we all get into the pulpit realizing people won't like us sometimes because of what we say, So it really wasn't about me, but it was thinking about, how could we have that on our conscience with our kids, our elderly, our families, anybody who darkens the door of our church. And so it was really reaching out to those people who knew more about this and who you also trusted on a spiritual level. You really want to be selective on that. You really want to be selective on who you ask these questions. Yeah. Because you want both sides to come in. You want the same kind of heart that God shows. The same shepherd heart, like you said, Pastor Luke.
Yep.
It's the exact same thing. So it was that way for us. And then, of course, God's providence lined it up for the right people to come. And we just started taking our time, looking at things, seeing the lack, seeing the need.
Yeah.
And we kind of went from there.
That's really good.
Yeah, for us, we had a number of law enforcement that we really leaned on, and we contacted the sheriff's department, we contacted the fire department, all of those agencies to kind of inform. And then from there, I guess what preceded all of that was a vision, what we wanted it to look like, what we wanted it to happen. And then we spent probably a year creating a playbook that we still, get instruction from, we still lean on, we still use as a filtering system. But in between that time, we spent a tremendous amount of time communicating to our congregation. As Americans, people do not like change. We reject it by our very nature, and it's in our DNA. So when we first started the security team, we faced some pushback about why do we need this and what is going to be required, and are you going to be checking ID at the door, and are they carrying firearms? And so we spent a lot of time, months, communicating to our congregation what this was going to look like. And then it was even perceived at the very beginning that it was the pastor's personal bodyguards. And so we had to spend a lot of time.
Nothing could be further from the truth.
Safety guy. Where's the guy? That's it.
That's it. So there was almost even an arrogance perceived on behalf of the staff of why do you need this, and
Why do you need this?
why do you need this?
That's what it
And
is, right?
To try to communicate this is. And the way that we did that was we really began to talk a lot about our children's ministry.
Right.
And about our
Right.
responsibility to protect, because no one's going to fight up against that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we faced the most resistance about was our children's ministry. We moved all of our children downstairs to a central wing. And because of that, we stopped allowing adults to exit out of certain doors that they had been exiting out of for 30, 40, since before you were born, Pastor Luke. And
Change.
we
Change.
even had, no joke, we had a boycott one time, which one of our Sunday school classes lined up and in defiance and petition, and they all lined up and walked out of the door that they knew they were not supposed to walk out of, just to simply say, you can't tell us what to do.
Yeah.
So we were redefining cultural expectation, which was the most difficult part. It wasn't recruiting, it wasn't training, it wasn't communicating, it was creating a culture.
Wow.
And that took us, well, we're still doing that.
Yeah.
Honestly, we're
Yeah.
still doing that.
I honestly think the fact that, that's been going on for 14 years.
Yeah.
I think we probably had more pushback because it wasn't as a common thing then. Now it's becoming a lot more common
Yeah.
for churches.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember I remember that. And,
Oh,
and we
yeah.
got several comments and stuff like that. So I
Those
serve
are
on the
things
security
that,
team.
like definitely don't get too proactive and like preach on humility right before that.
That's right. That's right.
I mean,
Or
because like you
rebellion.
said, it's not just a one message kind of thing. It's you're changing a culture.
That's it.
And you have to realize, and I think this is something that we probably all share. There's a lot of people out there, especially pastors, sometimes can have this kind of us versus them mentality with their congregation.
Yeah.
They kind of feel like I'm God's man and I'm supposed to take you this way, and so you got to follow. And they forget that a shepherd would come alongside of their sheep and heal their wounds and spend time with them. And so we need to do that too. You have to be involved with your people to let them see your heart and realize that change is a very hard thing for all of us, and especially for churches sometimes. And so you have to be willing to get down and dirty with them. You have to be able to get there and hear why they're concerned, because a lot of times these people who resist, they feel like they're not being heard.
Yep.
And so you have to really spend some time. This is not something you can just start tomorrow, and have armed security. I mean, if you can, if you're in that place, I guess then that's, hey, like, praise the Lord, all the hard work's done for you. But, for the rest of us in real life, in real church, you're having to really work with these people and you're having to win them over, because this is something that needs to be done. And so you have to find out what works for your church. Like where would like you said, with the children's ministry, that's the first place a lot of people would say, oh yeah, hey, take care of our kids.
Absolutely.
It could be something as simple as starting a check-in sheet. A lot of people in churches, even the way ours is laid out, we realized we had no control over who picked up our kids. And so when we started implementing a check-in and a sign-out sheet and things like that, and we started giving out, tags and things of that nature, people started really appreciating that, because it was, 2 extra seconds of their day.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they realized, oh, wow, I'm the only person who can come pick up my kid now.
Yeah.
And it was little things like that was creating, like you said, that culture. I mean, that's a huge word, I think. And it created that culture to say, okay, we're protecting our kids. We want to make sure that nothing happens. We started it at Vacation Bible School because we had some situations we had to address there. And it's the culture. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I think that the first step is to create a compelling vision, and then a strategy to achieve that preferred future or that desired outcome, and then that will affect the culture, because we all know that culture will eat vision for breakfast
That's right.
every single day.
Every day.
And it's patience, and as you talked about, it's just effective communication, and it's empathy. It's explaining to people why we do what we do. So transparency is a huge part of that, and then just being faithful. Obedience in the same direction over a long period of time will eventually help you achieve those goals.
That's good.
So
We've never done that before.
yeah, exactly.
That's
Right.
right.
Exactly.
Right.
That's
That's the common.
Yep. And ours started several years before we ever actually got a security team started. And Bible school was one of the big things because we had people that would come and pick up children. We didn't have a clue who they were. And then I said, no, sir, we're not going to do that. You're going to put down on this piece of paper who is allowed to come and pick up that child. If that person doesn't come, they either have to call us and say this person's allowed to come and get my child, or child doesn't go anywhere until we contact that parent. And so it, resistant to change. People didn't like that. I don't care. It's your child. We're protecting your child.
Right.
And so we had that going on probably as security 4 or 5 years before we ever started the security team.
Yeah.
And then for doing it for the church, it was resisted because we've never needed one before. Why do we need one now? We don't need that. We don't need that.
We're a small church. Something like that's not going to happen
gonna
at a
happen
small
here.
church.
We know everybody
Yeah.
here. We
Yep.
know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then those church shootings that you were talking about
Yeah.
started changing people's minds.
That's right.
And then they said, you know what, maybe we need to do something. And so the only thing I was told when they come around and said, yeah, let's do this, I'm okay with it. The only thing I was told is I don't want to see a gun. I don't care who carries, I just don't want to see a gun. So, and then I looked, I don't have the privilege of having law enforcement at the church. So I started looking, we have several ex and retired military at the church, and I started going to them.
That's really
And I
good.
said, okay, what do we need to do here?
Yep.
And how we get that started.
Right.
And that's who I've got leading the team right now is an ex-military guy.
Right. Good.
So,
I think we all know that, biblically, the church is under attack anyway, and that's not a new concept. That's a concept that is age old.
That's a spiritual battle from
That's
day one.
age
Yeah.
old, and
Yeah.
so this is just a new. It's a new form of the same thing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's nothing new under the sun. The Bible says.
Yeah.
And for us, it's one of these things where, people who may be resistant to some sort of safety, some sort of security, whatever you want to call it. People who are resistant to that has to be aware that this has been happening for decades. I mean,
Right.
centuries. I mean, it just because someone comes in with a gun, well, that used to be a Roman soldier, or it used to be a Greek soldier, or whatever it is to come in to take over. It's very, very biblical to protect the flock.
Very.
So,
Yeah.
Okay, so on that,
Yeah.
when you have people that say, but wait a second, you're not, by doing something like this, you're not allowing God to protect us. You're relying on man to protect us and protect this church. Or the thing I hear a lot of times is, wait a second, the Bible said, I get this. I said, oh, you're a Christian, right? I said, yeah. I said, okay, but what do you do with the thing where Jesus says that, if they slap you on one cheek, turn the other one to them? That's not self-defense.
A slap on the cheek is a lot different than a bullet in the head. That's my first
quote
that is my quote to that one, honestly, because first of all, we're all interpreters here, so we won't get into the exegetical problems with all of that, but let's just go with where people are on that. I mean, okay, exactly right. I think we all have a firm commitment to Psalm 139. All my days are written in your book, right? I think we preach that way. We live that way. We've experienced COVID together that way. We also wear seatbelts. We also, if somebody was breaking into our own house, which is our first point of ministry, there's no difference in the New Testament between the home and the church. The home is the church, and the church is a home. So there's no difference between a certain location, even though we have church buildings, quote unquote, and things like that.
Yeah.
Somebody broke into somebody's house. My first question is to them, do you just allow them to come in and have their way?
Yeah.
Of course not. Of course not. And again, we want to exercise faith, but faith also takes action. And so faith is not trusting that God's going to keep us alive forever, because that's nowhere found in Scripture. We're all going to suffer. We're going to get sick. Every one of us is going to die. I mean, that's just, it's batting 1,000 on that one. So
100% chance.
Yeah.
Unless Jesus comes back.
Unless Jesus comes back, that's the only way we escape, you know. And
right.
so we all are living in a real world with real problems, and we're having to sort of address those from the standpoint of how would God want us to take care of people within reason. You know, obviously there's, and I think again it goes back to need. There's some people who think that you got to pat down everybody at the church and have metal detectors and passports and things of that nature. Shameless plug. But that's not how you live your life, you know. And we're not called to be Christians for an hour a week. We're called to be Christians everywhere we go. And so how do we protect within reason, you know, within reason and just common sense and sensibilities? How do we do that, but also allow God to do His work, you know? Sure.
Yeah, I think it's God's power, but it's our cooperation that, you know,
100%.
and I think also that we get caught up that the primary responsibility of the security team is to eliminate active shooters. For us, the security team, we have divorced parents in which a parent may come who does not have custody that tries to remove a child from that environment.
Yep.
So we have security that intervene on that. In other words, the security team's primary responsibility is to make sure that no disruption comes in regard to hearing the gospel to the people who come to hear the gospel. Right. And that may be that someone desperately needs to talk to the pastor right now, you know, whether the pastor's on the platform, he's, you know, or to remove someone that wants to dominate my time or my attention. So it's not that the security team's primary responsibility is to eliminate active shooters or potential active shooters. They are multifaceted. Their primary responsibility is to make sure that when people come to church on a Sunday morning that they can hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. Right. So whatever that obstacle that needs to be removed from that is their responsibility that day. In other words, we have never had, thankfully, never had a active shooter at Mount Zion, but we have had many, almost weekly instances in which the security team has been a necessity to make sure that people can hear the gospel.
That's right. I think for us, you know, you were asking about that, and recently my mom had some surgery, and when the doctor got in there, he found cancer, and he removed it all. And he'd come back out to the waiting room and he said, you know, we didn't know this was here, but I'm confident that I got it all. And so that's almost like, you know, saying you're putting God in a box when you say, all right, God can only do this. He can only do it this way. He doesn't need a gun. No, God doesn't need a gun, or he doesn't need a safety team or what, but he can only do this. But you're not using, you know, God used that doctor to save my mom from cancer.
Yeah.
And so the whole entire thing is like, don't put God in a box when it's talking about the sheep. And so for us, we got to jokingly calling our safety team the Sheepdogs. Yeah. Because, you know, but it's not a joke; it's a real like.
Yeah, I mean,
So
there's three different types of people in my line of work. We consider three different types of people. And that's everybody fits into sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs.
That's right. That's right.
You know, and you know, wolves and sheepdogs are very, very similar.
Yep.
It's just basically what your focus is and everything.
Perspective is everything.
Yes,
That's right.
And so you can't put God in a box of what he's going to use to protect the flock. I mean, he can use anything. That's kind of my rebuttal, I guess you'd say, to that.
Romans 13 says that, you know, the governing powers are given the authority of the sword. You know, and that's a minister of God for good. And a sword wasn't used to spank people with, right? I mean, like we understand what that means, and so we're availing ourselves of what's available in our society within reason, because none of us want to cross the line of saying, "Hey, we don't trust God." We don't know what God's going to do. Yeah. You know, we don't know what He's going to do in certain situations like that. But we've been given so much access to freedom right now and to things of that nature that we need to avail ourselves of them.
All right, guys, I hope you really enjoyed that. We are going to come back next time talking some more. As you are listening to this, like I said before, even if this is not really applicable to your life, there is still a lot of great principles that we talk about. And just to be honest with you, it gets really fun at times. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Keep coming back, and we'll see you in the next episode.